Ever wonder what it was like the day Disneyland opened to the public for the very first time? Through the lens of this money order purchased at the Disneyland branch of Bank of America on that day, we're going back there next on The Good Old Days. There's so much to know about Disney and the impact he had on childhood and adulthood. Disneyland was probably his most profound contribution. Now it'd be easy for me to turn this episode into a full-length Ken Burns documentary, but I'm going to stay focused on just 2 days. 2 days that have become near mythical in Disney history. That's when Disneyland opened for the first time on July 17th and 18th, 1955. We can explore more about Disney in future episodes of The Good Old Days. I also promised the motley crew that's off camera that filming at Disneyland would not take all day. July 17th, 1955 was the first day Disney opened to invited guests only, and it was on Monday, the 18th of July, that it opened to the public. Now we're going to talk a bit about the unusual things that occurred on the 17th, but we're going to put more of a focus on the 18th. It was on the 18th that Lucia Gaxiola and her boys, Michael and Chris, were 3 of the first 50,000 people to jam into the park and discover the Disneyland magic for the first time. One of her first stops was a Disneyland Bank of America branch just inside the entrance, where she purchased 2 very special $1 money orders made out to her sons. See, Lucia knew that that day was something special, and those money orders would create a link to a memory, a connection that they could carry with them long into the future. So, through the one surviving money order, let's go back to July 17th and 18th, 1955, and see what Lucia, Michael, and Chris experienced. Now, to understand the 18th and the 17th, you have to understand some history, some context. When Disney broke ground in Disneyland, he promised he would have it open within a year. He was turning 160 acres of orange groves into Disneyland. That was a grand statement. 1 year and a day later, he did achieve it. And he achieved it through a lot of help, financing for one. The park cost $17 million, which back in 1955 was a fortune. Bank of America helped finance it. Roy Disney mortgaged real estate, even sold some, and even took a loan out on Walt's life insurance policy. And oddly enough, ABC Television Network was a third investor in the park. So the park opened, and of course, crowds came. The grand opening of Disneyland was broadcast live on the ABC Television Network and co-hosted by future President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. When those cameras went live, an estimated 90 million people tuned in. The population of America in 1955 was only 166 million people. That meant that 54% of everyone in the entire country stopped what they were doing to watch the festivities. As a comparison, in 2015, the Super Bowl had its largest audience of 114 million people. The population of America in 2015 was 321 million people. That meant that only 36% of the population watched the game. The grand opening of Disneyland, the live broadcast in 1955, stands out as one of the greatest television events in the history of television. One other noteworthy statistic: Anaheim in 1955 was a sleepy, quiet farming community of 14,000 people. Imagine what happened to that quiet the day after Disneyland welcomed its first guest through the turnstiles. So, July 17th, 1955 was an absolute crazy day. By rushing to get the park open, there are a lot of things that just weren't ready. Probably the thing that exasperated the problem the most: 11,000 invited guests, 28,000 show up. See, demand had grown because of the Disney TV show, which debuted in 1954 on ABC, that everyone wanted to be here. Everyone wanted to experience it. So they were counterfeiting the tickets. And those 28,000 people jammed this park and created a number of problems, because number one is they had basically planned for 11,000 people. Think of food. So the 3 restaurants that were open, the few food carts that were open, were running out of food. On top of that, there had been a plumber strike, so Walt had to decide between finishing bathrooms and getting drinking fountains going. He chose the bathrooms. So there are very few drinking fountains to go around, so huge lines formed at the few drinking fountains that were operating. Those lines rivaled the ride lines. Also, the temperature that day. 100 degrees. Remember, back then people dressed up when they went out. So men wore suits, women wore dresses. It wasn't comfortable. Also, the concrete on Main Street, what I'm walking on right now, had just been poured on the morning of the 17th, and the temperature kept it from curing. So women in their high heels were sinking into Main Street. Probably the scariest thing that happened that day happened around Sleeping Beauty's castle. There was a gas leak, and that led to flames licking at the side of the castle. Ultimately, they had to close Fantasyland, Adventureland, and Frontierland for parts of the afternoon to fix that problem. As you can imagine, that was pretty serious. Now, Walt Disney also had built an apartment above the firehouse on Main Street. Unfortunately, he got locked in it and couldn't get out for part of the day. Luckily, he got out before the live broadcast began because, of course, he was the center of that live broadcast. Other events that day, the rides. Not all the rides were ready. Dumbo wasn't flying. Peter Pan wasn't taking off. Casey Jr. wasn't leaving the station. And unfortunately, Rocket to the Moon, a ride that so many were looking forward to, wasn't yet blasting off. So the challenges existed, and there were many, many more. Walt was running between the 22 camera stations that had been set up around the park. He was so busy, as was Roy, that they did not know what was going on. They didn't know that their grand opening was cratering, at least behind the scenes. Of course, on the live broadcast, there was nothing of the sort. It was fantasy. No one knew that the challenges existed behind the scenes. He would find out, obviously, many hours later and took immediate corrective action in order to get things ready for the 18th when the general public would be welcome for the first time. So that was the 17th. What Lucia, Michael, and Chris experienced on the 18th was something even more. Up there, that's Walt's apartment above the firehouse. That's where he was on July 18th when the park opened and all those throngs of people surged through, including Lucia, Michael, and Chris. He probably waved to them. Lucia was a special mother. She knew childhood was fleeting, and she did everything she could to create memories for her and her children. In fact, she saved everything from her children as they grew up, making little notes on it or putting tags on it saying who it was from, when it was from, and what it meant to her. So it was natural that when Disney debuted his TV show in 1954, they would be tuning in every time it was on. So their own anticipation for the opening of Disneyland was huge. And on the 17th, when the ABC live broadcast started, they were there watching every minute of it. They got so excited that they left for Disneyland in the wee hours of the 18th. Now, they weren't the only ones. By 2 a.m., people were lining up for the park when it opened at 10 a.m. In those 8 hours, a line of people, 4 abreast, stretching a mile through the parking lot, numbering 15,000 people, were ready to surge into the park. By that afternoon, over 50,000 people were jammed into Disneyland. It's an amazing number, and one which Lucia and her boys even had challenges getting through at times. Now, in 1955, getting into the park cost $1 for adults, 50 cents for kids 12 and under. Once you're inside, you had to buy ride tickets. They used an A through C ticket system, with tickets costing 10, 20, or 30 cents. The D&E tickets weren't added till the end of the year. Now, some of you are thinking, wow, $1, how cheap that was. I know, I paid $242 for my 2-day park hopper, and my kids as well, each one of us, plus $20 more per ticket for the new Max Pass. But it's all relative. I've talked about perspective before in other episodes of the good old days. In 1955, the average median income was $4,200. 5 gallons of gas cost less than $1. A gallon of milk was 95 cents, and that Mickey Mouse lunchbox, 88 cents. So $1 back then was not an insignificant amount of money to a lot of people. Behind me, that's where the Bank of America branch used to be, right on Main Street, where Lucia bought the boys those 2 money orders. Still here, you can see it. It's now the Disneyana store. 1955 to 1993, this was the Bank of America branch at Disneyland. Now, what do you do with a giant vault when you close a bank branch down? Leave it exactly where it is. Back in 1955, this was a full-service bank branch. As you see in the picture, it had windows like any other bank branch in any small town in America. The only difference is this was Main Street, USA, in Disneyland. Lucia, Michael, and Chris came in here that day. They were offering special money orders in denominations of $1, $5, and $10. So you can imagine the branch was quite crowded. For back in those days, credit and debit cards didn't exist. Cash was king. So people lined up at those windows to do, guess what? Withdraw cash from their accounts. The good old days. Now imagine July 18th, 50,000 people are here. If 28,000 was overwhelming on the 17th, imagine what 50,000 was on the 18th. Lucia and the boys, they had to fight their way through those crowds. In fact, there were times when Lucia took Michael and Chris's hands and literally had to shove her way through the crowds. And there were places that she came to where they just couldn't get through the crowds. That didn't stop them from really enjoying the day, because Walt had brought his movie magic and delivered it to Main Street, and this was their opportunity to experience it. It was a great day. Now, not all the rides were working yet. Some of the rides that were working, and the lines were very long, Autopia, Mad Hatter Teacups, Mark Twain Riverboat, the Explorer boats, which became Jungle Cruise, the Canal boats, which became the Storybook Canal Ride. Snow White's Scary Adventure, Peter Pan, was working on the 18th, among other rides. Many attractions were not open as well, but some of the ones that were, and one of the ones that Lucia and the boys really enjoyed was Circarama. And Circarama really gave you an all-inclusive experience. 50 years before Google Street View, you had Circarama, because Disney took 9 cameras, put them on top of a car and drove around and filmed. And when he displayed that, it was displayed in the circular building, which was in Tomorrowland. 9 screens, 9 cameras, no matter which way you turned, it's as if you were there. What an experience. It was virtual reality without the virtual. One little known secret about the early days of Disneyland. On Main Street, there was a shop called the Intimate Apparel Shop, and inside was the Wizard of Bras. Lucia stopped in there. All I could say is the Wizard of Bras didn't last 6 months, and the Intimate Apparel Shop was gone by the next summer. Some people today say Disney's rides, especially the old original ones, are quaint, cute, or old-fashioned. You have to remember, back in 1955, children, they didn't have smartphones, they didn't have the internet, they weren't connected to the world 24/7, they barely had televisions. What they did was they used their imagination to create make-believe. They went outside and played. What Disney did was use imagination to allow others to explore and create their own make-believe worlds. That, my friends, was Disney's secret sauce. Even with Black Sunday and the overwhelming response on July 18th, it was clear Disney had created something amazing. And it was far more than evolving amusement parks into theme entertainment. Disney knew he had to create something that didn't just amp up adrenaline levels and heart rates. He created lands with characters that told stories and made it possible for people of all ages to use their imagination and create make-believe again. He understood what it was to be a child, and he also understood that no matter how old you got, the inner child didn't go away. LA Times article written after the opening said Disney had created something that allowed children's dreams and adults' aspirations to become reality. And that's what was unique, and that's what draws 40 to 50,000 people a day to this park still. You can see the people just walking behind me. The park, this is a non-holiday day. People are working, and there's probably 40,000 people here. It's incredible. Lucia knew something was special. She was right. Those money orders were never cash, because she knew those money orders locked her time and place at that moment, that special moment on July 18th. She also understood that history was being created, and those money orders would link that history to her family story. So when her boys grew up, they could come back to that exact spot and know that they were there with their mother and their young selves. And that would provide them their own very special connection back to the good old days. Till next time.